Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Sunday morning, talking tonight's 9-game slate around the association. Before we dive in, quick reminder, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. That way you get notified whenever I post a new video. Also, those likes go a long way to helping my videos find their way into search results. If you stumbled across this video and you're not already following me on Twitter, or you're not a member of my content and projection package, make sure you head over to the Twitter machine, my Twitter handle at BrentHyden1 in the description down below. You can send me a direct message over there and find out how you can get access to my content and projections for a one-time price that carries you all the way through the playoffs, or you can head over to my Patreon page, which is also in the description down below, and sign up for one of the monthly packages. But without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the games. The first game of the night that we're going to talk about, Charlotte at Boston. Boston 7-point favorites in this one, a 222 over under in this game. Boston coming in losers of 3 in a row. Not really a whole lot of injury news here to talk about. Marcus Morris is expected to play, but that's something that we probably want to keep an eye on. Al Horford is probable. Aaron Baines continues to be out with that broken hand. This is an interesting game to target. There's a few places that I kind of want to look at. The Celtics are a little bit of a difficult matchup for the Hornets. There's not a lot to really like from the Charlotte side of things, outside of a couple guys like Kemba Walker over on DraftKings at 8,500 is pretty appealing in this spot. He's 9,800 on FanDuel. That's a little less appealing. This is a spot where I think he can have some success. We have seen the Celtics struggle against guys that can operate off the pick and roll, guys that can create separation off screens, guys that can drive. And Kemba Walker, obviously, really, really solid scoring out of the pick and roll. He leads the team with 15.3 drives per game. Has had some up and downs recently, shooting the ball pretty poorly, 35.6%. Over the last 5 games, 32% from 3. Obviously, we expect those numbers to come up at some point. As you can see, his season average is much higher than that, so regression should hit at some point. And against the Celtics team, last time these teams faced off, actually played really well with 43 points, 59 DraftKings fantasy points. I have interest in Kemba Walker in tournaments. Outside of that, there's some interest in Cody Zeller's production's kind of taken a hit over the last couple games, but generally speaking, he's a pretty strong cash game big man. He's still pretty cheap across the industry, 4,600 on DraftKings, 5,300 on FanDuel. So if you're building some cash lineups, I definitely don't hate taking a shot on Cody Zeller. Just a guy generally gets you in the mid to upper 20s with upside, as you can see by just scrolling through his game logs. So he's someone that I do have, again, some interest in tournaments. Boston giving up 35.5 defensive rebounds per game this season, which is a pretty decent boost to Zeller, who averages about 8 defensive rebound chances per game. You can look at Jeremy Lamb in cash, a little bit better price on DraftKings at 5,700. Marvin Williams, who's been playing pretty well recently, is someone that you can look at in tournaments. Elevated price tag, but again, has been shooting pretty darn well recently, seeing his minutes climb because he has been playing some solid basketball recently. On the Boston side of things, the return of Al Horford is going to hurt this rotation a little bit, especially when you have someone like Kyrie, who's 9K on DraftKings, 9,400 on FanDuel. Coming in is priced up because of how well he has performed with Al Horford out of the lineup recently. Going to be just a tournament option for me here. Prior to struggling against Milwaukee, had notched at least 20 points and 40 plus fantasy points in 4 straight games. Still viable in tournaments. I think there's going to be places where I would rather look tonight, but this is a spot where I don't expect Kyrie Irving to have a lot of ownership, so he's definitely someone to consider here. Charlotte ranks 26th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards. Marcus Smart, someone that is definitely interesting here, has been playing a lot of minutes recently. Upper 20s, low 30s, has been playing pretty well. We've seen some assist numbers out of him recently, as well as being able to take a decent amount of shots. Has not shot the ball very well recently, but it's something to keep an eye on. Marcus Smart, someone that I do have interest in cash. Again, Charlotte ranking 26th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards. Just a strong mid-range option here. Morris expected to return in this game, but again, monitor the news. He's fine in cash. He's fine in tournaments. Doesn't really jump off the page here. Same with Hayward. Doesn't really jump off the page here, but Charlotte really struggling to defend corner threes. They are allowing 41.1% on corner threes this season, which is a boost to both Hayward and Morris in the spot. Jaylen Brown coming off a monster game, gonna move back to the bench, assuming Marcus Morris is back in for this game. I don't know that I want to chase the Jaylen Brown game from last time out, but he's definitely someone at 4,700 on DraftKings, 4,100 on FanDuel. I do like that FanDuel price, especially in tournaments. So he's definitely interesting in tournaments over on FanDuel. The return of Horford, who probably is going to be on a minutes limit, would definitely expect him to be 25 to 27 minutes maximum in this spot. Is going to hurt Daniel Tice and Williams. They're just going to take a hit in minutes. You can definitely sprinkle them in tournaments if you want. I don't really see a reason to. The guy that I do have the most interest in, especially in GPPs, but he's definitely someone to consider in cash games, is going to be Jason Tatum. He's just been playing really, really well. Has the rebounding and scoring upside in this matchup. Charlotte has struggled a little bit against power forwards this season. Jason Tatum, someone that I do have interest in here tonight. Moving on, Phoenix at Brooklyn. Brooklyn 7-point favorites in this one, 220.5 over under. Phoenix coming in on the heels of a 3 overtime game. So it's a little bit of a painful spot here for Phoenix. I would definitely monitor the news. Devin Booker played 55 minutes last night. May not play in this game. Again, just speculation. Would definitely monitor the news. We also have Alan Crabb and Karis LeVert who are out. The Nets have been surging, winners of 7 of the last 10 games. That being said, they still have the 9th worst defensive rating, a 110.6 over that span, but a pretty solid 113.5 offensive rating. Prior to last night's triple overtime game, I wrote up that I had interest in Booker, one of the top options from Phoenix over his last 3 games, averaging 30.3 points, 5.7 assists, 6.3 rebounds, 48% shooting, and 38.1% from 3. Obviously, those numbers going up when he dropped like 400 million fantasy points in 55 minutes last night, averaging 41 minutes over his last 4 games, 46% shooting, 31 points per game. He's still interesting in tournaments, but for the most part, Phoenix is going to be a fade for me. It's not a spot where I'm terribly intrigued by a team that's coming off playing a triple overtime game with travel, even though it's not a lot of travel going from Washington to Brooklyn. I will say the guys that I do have the most interest in are going to be some of the guys like Richaun Holmes, Melton, and maybe someone like Bridges. We'll have to wait and see. Brooklyn does rank 30th in defensive efficiency to centers on the season. They've allowed them to pull 17.1 rebounds and 24.8 points. That does make Holmes a solid value here. Again, someone that could get a few extra minutes because he only played 24 last night, with Ayton playing almost 40 minutes in that triple overtime game. So Richaun Holmes, someone that I do have a little bit of interest in as a value option here. Again, the rest of these guys outside of like Melton, who did not play very many minutes, would be pretty much fades in the spot now, unless you're just building a bunch of tournament lineups. Like if you're doing 150 in like the quarter arcade or something, then sure, sprinkle some exposure here. Oubre and Warren would be 2 guys to consider as well. MIKAL Bridges, I did touch on him in my notes. Brooklyn has allowed small forwards to shoot 46% from the floor, 44% from 3, 50% of his field goal attempts are 3-pointers. So he is someone, even though, again, coming off that really, really tough game, 3,900, I don't hate taking a shot on MIKAL Bridges here tonight. The Nets, I think, are going to be very popular, and for good reason, facing a Suns team that is coming in on back-to-back after playing 3 overtimes. I have a lot of interest in several options here. The backcourt duo of D'Angelo Russell and Spencer Dinwiddie, both prime spots here. Phoenix ranking 24th in defensive efficiency to point guards. Dinwiddie has been insane recently, especially since signing that new contract. But since LeVert went down, he's just been playing really, really well. And I have a lot of interest in Spencer Dinwiddie here, averaging 36.7 fantasy points on 23.5 points, 5.7 assists, 2.8 rebounds, almost 51% shooting, and 41% from three over his last 6 games. He trails D'Angelo Russell in usage this month. 26.4%, Russell 27.5%. Dinwiddie, a guy at 7,200 on DraftKings, 7,100 on FanDuel. I feel pretty comfortable about him in cash. Again, he's just been playing so well. Minutes have been solid for him, especially with Allen Crabbe out. You do expect him to be able to play a decent amount of minutes, so he's someone that I like a lot in cash. Tournaments, I'm going to lean towards Russell for just $100 more on DraftKings and a little bit cheaper over on FanDuel. Russell just a little bit more reliant on his scoring if he's not able to shoot the ball very well. Atkinson has shown a penchant to throw Dinwiddie out there over Russell. So Russell, a guy just tournament options only. Outside of those guys, Rodions Kuric's definitely interesting here, coming off a monster outing. Suns do rank 24th in defensive efficiency to small forwards. They've allowed him to shoot 46% from the floor and 37% from three. Again, Kuric's, with Allen Crabbe being out, has been playing more minutes, coming off 34 minutes, 24 points. I have a lot of interest in Kuric's here. Should be able to put up a solid outing here. Price is a little bit elevated. I think he's going to be popular, so if you're building a ton of lineups, it does warrant maybe a tournament pivot to someone like Joe Harris in this spot tonight. Rondé Hollis-Jefferson is fine in tournaments. Damari Carroll at 3,900 on FanDuel, a perfectly fine value punt, especially if you expect his score to get dropped. Jarrett Allen has been pretty inconsistent recently, but he is in a great spot here. Phoenix giving up 46 rebounds per game and 15.4 second chance points per game. 74% of his shots come at the rim. Phoenix is allowing opponents to shoot 66.1% at the rim. Jarrett Allen, 5,400 on DraftKings. I really like that price in cash in tournaments. 6,300 on FanDuel, more of a tournament option here. And then Joe Harris, who has been shooting the ball pretty well recently, is in play as well. And then I would not shy away from taking a shot on a value play like Ed Davis. Ed Davis at 3,400 on DraftKings, gonna play like most likely 17 to 18 minutes in like a normal game script, but if this game blows out for some reason, which it very well could, Ed Davis would potentially get upwards of 23, 24 minutes, and at $3,400 on DraftKings and $4,100 on FanDuel could easily get on top of that salary tonight. You can also look at Jared Dudley. It is a revenge game for Dudley, but also has been playing pretty well recently. So Jared Dudley, another name to consider here tonight as value. Although I don't know that I want to chase Jared Dudley's recent performances. Moving on to Chicago at Cleveland. Cleveland 1.5 point favorites in this game. 201.5 over under. Interesting spot because we have a lot of injuries for specifically the Cleveland side, but also Chicago. Cameron Payne is doubtful for this game. We already know Bobby Portis is out. Zach LaVine is out. Denzel Valentine is out. But on the Cleveland side, Nwaba, Love, Thompson, and Hood all out. Nwaba's actually doubtful, but not expected to play. Justin Holiday for the Bulls has been struggling. Just 9 of 43. Has made just 9 of 43 attempts over his last 4 games. Jordan Clarkson has been solid. Posted his second straight 20-point game after sitting out Tuesday's win at Indiana. And Larry Nance has 3 straight double-doubles after recording 16 points and 12 rebounds against Toronto. The Bulls, again, I mentioned LaVine, Portis being out, does open up things for Lauri Markkanen, Chris Dunn, and Justin Holiday, the 3 guys that I have the most interest in. So far in the season, we only have like a 60 to 70 minute sample size for those guys whenever we have LaVine and Portis off the floor. Dunn, 34% usage rate in those minutes, though, 1.18 fantasy points per minute. Lauri Markkanen, 22% usage rate in those minutes, 1.21 fantasy points per minute. Obviously, he does have a usage rate closer to like 25, 26% on the season. I have a lot of interest in both Dunn and Markkanen in this spot. Cavs ranked 23rd in defensive efficiency to power forwards, despite ranking like 29th in fantasy points allowed. They have allowed 51.6% field goal percentage to go along with 41.2% from beyond the arc for Lauri Markkanen. We did see him break out last game. Again, played 37 minutes against the Magic, 20 field goal attempts, so it definitely rectified that game against Brooklyn where he only took 6. Shot really well. That was good to see. Shot really well from 3. Really tough to imagine Lauri Markkanen not being able to put up a really solid game in this spot. He is someone that I do have interest in as a core option here tonight. I do really like Chris Dunn as well. Can be used in cash in tournaments, although I do recommend him being more of a tournament option just because he is reliant on a lot of things going right for him to have solid games. But Cleveland does rank 30th in defensive efficiency to point guard, so he does have a lot going for him in this spot tonight. Chris Dunn at 7,200 on DraftKings, pretty appealing, and 7,500 on FanDuel, so you can definitely use him here tonight. Has been playing pretty well and obviously can notch the rebounds and assists. Outside of him, I do really like Justin Holiday. Again, I mentioned Ben Meyer in a shooting slump, 27.8% shooting over the last 6 games. Continues to play a lot of minutes, is supplementing his box score with other stats, with rebounds, with assists, with steals. It is a pretty solid matchup here for him tonight. So I'm going to go back to the well with Justin Holiday. Like, I actually don't mind building around Holiday, Dunn, and Markkanen if you're wanting to get some exposure to this game. It should be a decent game to get some exposure to. Cleveland is allowing opposing small forwards to shoot 46.2% from the floor and 34.8% from 3. May not be able to shake that slump given those numbers, but again, someone that I still feel pretty comfortable in. He's only 5,600 on FanDuel, 5,400 on DraftKings, so pretty solid option with upside here. With Cameron Payne out for this game, you'll get some Arcidiacono and Shaq minutes, Shaquille Harrison. Both guys are fine as like value punts, especially over on FanDuel. Both guys are really, really cheap where you can drop their score. Arcidiacono, nice to see him get some assists in a couple of these last few games, but still someone I don't feel terribly comfortable in. But again, you do expect the minutes to be there for him tonight. I mentioned Cleveland being shorthanded in this spot with Nwaba and Hood. With Hood being out and Nwaba being doubtful for this game, so I do have some interest in Sexton, Clarkson, and Burks. Obviously, those 3 going to easily eclipse 30 minutes in the spot. Clarkson is my preferred option, leads the team in usage, most of that coming off the bench. But he's also just a better per minute producer than Sexton and Burks. 48% of his field goal attempts come in the paint or mid-range. Chicago really struggling to defend those 2 areas, and I mentioned he's been playing really well recently. Has been over 30 minutes in 3 of the last 4, has scored over 20 real points in 3 of the last 4, and we know he can get you some assists and rebounds. I have a lot of interest in Jordan Clarkson. If you're building on DraftKings, especially in cash, I would recommend having some Clarkson or Alec Burks in this spot. Alec Burks coming in at 4,400 on DraftKings, 4,700 on FanDuel. It's just a really fair price. Again, he's someone that I have a lot of interest in, has been also playing pretty well since coming over to Cleveland. Has shown upside at times, coming off 3 really tough matchups, has still really produced. Toronto, Charlotte, Indiana, not great matchups for wing players, especially guys that do a lot of ball handling. So this is a good spot for Alec Burks. I would definitely recommend getting some exposure to him. One of the better value plays on the slate. And actually, if you take a look over at my projections, He comes in at about 26 fantasy points, 27 fantasy points on DraftKings. They're pretty much the same over on FanDuel. As you can see, projects for about 6 times value over on DraftKings and just shy of that over on FanDuel because of a slightly elevated price tag. But he does rank out as the best value on DraftKings and the second best or third best value over on FanDuel just because Colin Sexton is really cheap over on FanDuel. Popping back over, looking at the game logs for Colin Sexton, he's just a guy who relies really heavily on scoring. Not a guy that you expect to be able to get the assist and things like that. We've seen his minutes come down recently. Obviously, blowouts part of that. Still expect him to play over 30 minutes, but the other guys, Alec Burks and Jordan Clarkson, are just better. They're better ball movers, they're better facilitators, they're better playmakers. Colin Sexton just can't do a whole lot of that stuff, so not someone I really want to use. Matthew Dellavedova, definitely interesting over on FanDuel. Not someone I really care too much about over on DraftKings, but you can drop his score over on FanDuel. Same with Jerron Blossom game. We've seen him play a decent amount of minutes recently. 3,500 on DraftKings. He's 3,700 on FanDuel. If he's going to get like 20 upper 20s in this spot, he could definitely get on top of that salary against this somewhat bad Chicago defense, especially if you imagine Jabari Parker being back in the rotation. Nance absolutely smashing recently, averaging 41 fantasy points per game over the last 6 games, averages 1.23 fantasy points per minute whenever you take all of these injured guys off the floor. Chicago giving up 24.7 points, 16.6 rebounds to opposing centers. Yeah, Larry Nance, again, someone very, very strong cash game and tournament option. Just really, really strong play in the spot tonight, so I have a lot of interest in Nance. And I mentioned Blossom game, Chetty Osman, even someone that you can look at in tournaments tonight. Moving on, Miami at Orlando, not really interested in a lot from this game. Orlando, 3.5 point favorites, 202 over under. Waiters is technically questionable, but not expected to play. Dragic is out. Winslow, I have him listed as questionable, even though he suited up last night. Jonathan Simmons questionable, and then guys like Mozgov and Frazier are questionable as well. The Heat have held opponents to just 94.8 during their longest winning streak of this season. They've been really, really strong recently. Not really interested in a lot from Orlando here outside of tournaments. Gordon has torched Miami so far this season, has had a team-high 23 points in the first 2 games against Miami. He's really struggled recently, though, shooting just 28.3% from the floor over his last 5 contests. Evan Fournier averaging 20 points over his last 3 games. Terrence Ross has been mired in a shooting slump, 4 for 22 in the last 2 games. Tyler Johnson struggled, held to 7 points on 1 of 6 shooting Sunday after averaging 17 points over his previous 3 games. And Derek Jones Jr., 11 points on 16 of 30 shooting and 6.8 rebounds over his last 4 games. Did not have a very good game last night. I did highlight that I thought he would struggle against Milwaukee, but that's last night. Looking at Orlando's side of things, Vucevic, obviously a strong option, has been outstanding of late, shooting 24 of 54 from the field, 5 of 14 from 3, with 16 rebounds and 20 points per game over the last 3. Continues to lead the Magic in usage, 26.8%. Has been pretty consistent against the Heat over the past few seasons, averaging he scored 44, 49.5, 45.8, 46.3, 44.5, and 40 fantasy points, and then there was one bad game where he only had 28 fantasy points in there. Nikola Vucevic at 9,300 on DraftKings, a pretty strong tournament option here. He is 9K over on FanDuel. Again, a strong tournament option in this spot. I do kind of like Aaron Gordon. Again, has torched the Heat in 2 previous meetings. He hasn't really been the three-point threat that we thought he would be this season. But Miami is allowing opposing power forwards to shoot 39% from 3 so far this season. So I do have a little bit of interest in him in tournaments if you're trying to pivot off the Lauri Markkanen and Larry Nance chalk. options. I would at least consider some Aaron Gordon tournament exposure here. Still playing a decent amount of minutes, so that is good to see. I don't hate Evan Fournier or Terrence Ross as cash options. They're too cheap. They're cheap options here. DJ Augustin, another guy, I just really always like using him in cash just because he generally is going to get you in the mid to upper 20s, play a decent amount of minutes. But again, Miami's defense has been really strong recently, so I don't really want to force a lot of exposure here. On the Miami side of things, coming in on a back-to-back, Winslow returned from injury last night. Definitely want to monitor the status. It is an intriguing spot here for him, but again, definitely want to keep an eye on him just in case they want to rest him on the second night of a back-to-back. Orlando has struggled against point guards this season. We're going to see Winslow and Richardson and Tyler Johnson share a lot of the ball handling duties. Winslow, 4,800 on DraftKings, had a decent game last night against Milwaukee. Could see him get over 30 minutes in the spot. I wouldn't be too shocked if it happened, but I also wouldn't be too shocked if it didn't. There's just so many bodies in Miami. Even without Dragic, they still have so many bodies that they can play. But he comes in at 5,300 on FanDuel, 4,800 on DraftKings. He's a fine tournament option. Josh Richardson, I still feel pretty confident in pretty much all formats. Going to take a decent amount of shots, high usage guy, play a decent amount of minutes. It's a pretty solid spot here for him. So I do have interest in him in cash and tournaments. 40% of his field goal attempts are three-pointers. Orlando allowing 36.2% on three-point attempts this season. So Josh Richardson, someone that you can look at. And then Hassan Whiteside, we saw him get a few minutes. We saw him actually play late in last night's game, got some minutes to close out the game. I don't know. It's always tough to trust him, but in tournaments against an Orlando team that he does kind of struggle against centers this season, he's worthy of tournaments. Orlando giving up 46 rebounds, 53 fantasy points per game to centers. So definitely someone to consider in tournaments. But again, minutes always a concern with Whiteside. You can look at Kelly Olynyk. James Johnson has been turning it on a little bit of late at 3,700. That is a pretty appealing price tag. We saw him also close out that game last night. Played really well. Eric Spoelstra hyped up how good Johnson has started to look as he's rounded into shape. So he's an interesting value in this spot tonight. Moving on to a very appealing game, New Orleans Pelicans at the Sacramento Kings. New Orleans just 1-point favorites in this one, 239 over under. Mirotic is doubtful. Elfrid Payton is out. Marvin Bagley also going to miss this game once again. Going to be reevaluated right about the new year. This is a great spot for a lot of these guys. Hitting on a couple guys that have been struggling or hot. Buddy Hield has been outstanding recently. De'Aaron Fox averaging 28.2 points per game over his last 5 games. Each one more. Just 13 of 47 from the floor over his last 5 games, has struggled a little bit. Looking at the New Orleans side of this, I expect this to be a freaking track meet. There's going to be a lot of high-scoring players from this game. I would definitely recommend making sure you get some exposure here. Obviously, Anthony Davis, one of the top options across the board here. Whenever you have him, whenever you take Mirotic and Elfrid off the floor, he does have a 32% usage rate and averages 1.63 fantasy points per minute. Whenever you put him on the floor, combined with Randall and Holiday, which they'll play a ton of minutes together, just 29.3% usage rate, 1.49 fantasy points per minute. Those are still really strong numbers here. Sacramento allowing 47.3 rebounds, 14.5 second chance points, and 52.4 points in the paint per game. Obviously, Anthony Davis coming in at 11.5 on DraftKings, 12.5 on FanDuel. A fantastic option here. Monster upside, especially in a fast-paced game. Going to play a ton of minutes. Put up 55 fantasy points in 26.5 minutes against the Kings last time out. Like, Anthony Davis should absolutely beast in the spot. We saw Julius Randle come back last game, 34 minutes against the Lakers. Did struggle a little bit, just 34 fantasy points, but I have a lot of interest in Julius Randle as a cheaper way to get exposure here should absolutely smash as well. And then Jrue Holiday taking 41% of his shots at the rim. Sacramento is allowing 66.4% shooting at the rim. Very, very, very strong option here. Jrue Holiday, a guy generally feel pretty comfortable. He's going to get you 40 plus fantasy points every single night. Has double-digit assists in 3 of the last 4. I have a lot of interest in Jrue Holiday as well. I would definitely recommend trying to get exposure to at least one of those 3 guys in this spot. I did mention Etuan Moore has been struggling a little bit recently. He's fine as a value. Darius Miller has taken on a little bit of a larger role. Coming in at 4,100 on DraftKings. He is 3,900 on FanDuel. I like him as a value play on FanDuel. Over 30 minutes in three straight. Again, some of that has come because like Tim Frazier and Etuan Moore have struggled a little bit, but has been scoring a little bit more. So I have some interest in Darius Miller as a value option as well. Unfortunately, Frazier has not been playing a lot of minutes recently, so I'm going to have to jump off that train. Looking at the Sacramento side of things, really good spot for a lot of Sacramento as well. That starts with De'Aaron Fox, who I mentioned has been just in fuego recently. 28.2 points over his last 5 games. You take away the abomination that was the Minnesota game, and De'Aaron Fox has been over 40 fantasy points, and I'm just going to eliminate that and say 4 straight because he only played 6 minutes in that game. This is a great spot here for De'Aaron Fox, who should be able to get whatever he wants here against the Pelicans. Pelicans have struggled against point guards, 25th in defensive efficiency to point guards this season. 35% of his shots come at the rim. New Orleans is allowing 64% shooting at the rim. They're also allowing almost 39% shooting on 3-point attempts. 21% of his field goal attempts are 3-pointers. I really, really like him in the spot. Only got 26 minutes against the Pelicans last time these teams faced off, but still put up a really solid 34 fantasy points. So he is a pretty strong play in the spot. Going to be someone that I'm going to have a lot of exposure to. 7,700 on DraftKings, 8,200 over on FanDuel. Iman Shumpert is definitely interesting here as well. We saw him return last game against Memphis, played 21 minutes. I expect his minutes to go up a little bit here tonight. New Orleans struggling against small forwards. They're ranked 30th in defensive efficiency to the position. They're also allowing 42.4% on corner threes. 20% of Shumpert's field goal attempts are corner threes. Iman Shumpert, one of my favorite value plays on the slate. 3,500 on DraftKings, 3,900 on FanDuel. Someone that I have a decent amount of interest in tonight. I also really like Bogdan Bogdanovic coming down to 5K on DraftKings, 6K over on FanDuel. Not as appealing on FanDuel, but this is a spot where, again, coming off a bad game, did struggle a little bit, struggled against Golden State, but it's still a pretty solid spot here for Bogdanovic. I would definitely recommend some exposure to him or Buddy Hield in the spot. It is a revenge game for Buddy Hield. So yeah, there is that. New Orleans is giving up 51.3 points in the paint. Willie Cauley-Stein leads the team at 10.9 points in the paint per game. Willie Cauley-Stein, 6,100 on DraftKings, 7K on FanDuel. A little bit pricey, but I don't hate using him in tournaments. Has been playing pretty well recently as well, if you take away the abomination that was the Minnesota game. So I have some interest in him. And then Costa Koufos, kind of intriguing as a value option here. Again, they're going to have to play a big man pretty much 48 minutes with Davis and Randall out there. So Costa Koufos, someone that you could see get a few extra minutes maybe. So not someone that I would shy away from maybe in tournaments here, especially over on FanDuel at 3,500. Moving on, Minnesota at Oklahoma City. Not a whole lot of interest in this game, especially from the Minnesota side. Obviously, we do know Jeff Teague is out. Derrick Rose is questionable. Oklahoma City's defense is just insanely good, and I don't really want to target too much against them. Towns would strictly be tournaments for me here. Does obviously have a pretty high usage rate whenever you have no Jimmy Butler and no Jeff Teague. We do see Rose, who has averaged 1.20 fantasy points per minute with a 34% usage rate in his minutes without Teague and Butler. You could definitely talk me into some Derrick Rose at 6,700 on DraftKings. in tournaments only. He is 7,300 on FanDuel. It's not a great matchup for him. Again, he does get a lot of his shots at the rim. He does take he takes about 44% of his shots in the paint. OKC has struggled a little bit to defend in the paint, but given that ankle and Derrick Rose's laundry list of injury history and how poorly the Timberwolves have handled injuries this season, again, just tournaments only for me here. Karl Anthony Towns, again, tournaments only, just a high usage guy. Covington's minutes make him somewhat appealing in cash. Again, not a very good spot here for him, but gonna play a decent amount of minutes, assuming the game stays close, and that has me interested in cash games. Gonna spend a lot of time, I think, guarding Russell Westbrook. Tyus Jones would be an interesting value play if Rose were to miss this game. But again, not really somewhere where I just want to force exposure. Even Tyus Jones, 4,300 on DraftKings, 3,600 on FanDuel, not terribly appealing. Same with Josh Okogie. Does project to be a pretty strong option here, but just another tournament option only for me. Looking at the Oklahoma City side of things, Paul George. Take advantage while you can. This price is insanely cheap, and it's going to go up. He's probably going to be over 10K on the Christmas Day slate. But Paul George, over the last 6 games, 53.4% shooting, 48% from 3, 33 points per game, 9.5 rebounds, and 5 assists. I highlighted in the notes prior to Paul George going absolutely nuclear last night. This is a great spot for him. I do want to get some exposure here. He's obviously been outstanding this month, but the Wolves ranked 27th in defensive efficiency to small forwards. They're giving up 22.6 points, 8.1 rebounds, 4.0 assists, 45% shooting, and 41.1% from 3. A lot of that has to do with the fact that Robert Covington has been the primary defender on teams like point guards, and so that has shifted the rotation down, the defensive assignments down, and so Paul George should be able to feast in this spot. I have a lot of interest in Paul George coming in, 9,200 on DraftKings, still affordable over on FanDuel as well. He's probably like 10K. Let me pull up their pricing, 9,900. So Paul George, very, very strong option here. Definitely have some interest in George if I can afford him. Russell is Russell. I don't really need to go too in depth here. Again, I did mention Robert Covington, probably going to spend a lot of time defending Russell Westbrook. That could hurt his upside a little bit, so I would reserve him for tournaments. I don't really feel like paying up for a stud tonight, which is kind of crazy, but if I did, it would be Anthony Davis over Russell Westbrook. Grant could obviously have some success here. Minnesota's allowing 22.3 points and 11.1 rebounds to power forwards. So Jeremy Grant, an interesting value option here. Continues to play a lot of minutes, has been inconsistent at times, but most nights he's going to get you mid to upper 20s. I have interest in Jeremy Grant as a value option here tonight. He is just 5,200 on FanDuel, a cash option. Same on DraftKings at 4,500. You can sprinkle in some Schroeder if you want, still playing a decent amount of minutes. 5,500 is pretty appealing. 5,800 on FanDuel, also somewhat appealing. Going to get you, upper 20s, maybe low 30s in minutes. And then Steven Adams, who has been just a freaking monster recently, 7,400 on DraftKings is a little bit appealing. 7,700 on FanDuel as well. More of a cash option, but he does have some tournament upside in the spot. Moving on, Clippers at Golden State. Golden State, 10.5 point favorites in this one, 233 over under. No real injury news, at least not anyone that matters. Gallinari has been pretty solid recently, shooting 18 of 27 from the floor, 11 of 11 from the three-point free throw line over his last 2 games. Klay Thompson has been shooting pretty poorly, 5 of 30 from 3-point range over his last 5 games. Montrezl Harrell has hit at least 50% of his shots in each of the last 13 games. I have a lot of interest in this game. I think it could go overlooked despite the high total. But there's definitely some spots to target here. Taking a look at the Clippers side of things first. Most of the offense, we can pretty much expect Gallinari, Harris, Lou Williams, and Montrezl Harrell to be the primary scoring options, those three guys do lead the team in usage. You have Gallinari 22.5%, Harris 23.4%, and Lou Williams 29.4%. Golden State is allowing 49.8 points in the paint, 15 fast break points. Harris leads the team at 9.2 points in the paint per game and is second on the team in fast break points. He's my top option here. I do have a lot of interest in Tobias Harris. 30% of his shots come at the rim. Golden State allowing 67.4% shooting at the rim. I really like Tobias Harris in the spot. He comes in at 7,600 on DraftKings, 8,100 on FanDuel. Again, consistently getting you upper 30s with upside. It's a pretty strong spot here for Tobias Harris. Just rebounding, floor, assist floor. A lot of the ball handling goes through him with that starting unit. So I have interest in Tobias Harris. Had a pretty strong game against Golden State last time these teams faced off. Again, Danilo Gallinari has been getting the line a decent amount. That really boosts his floor. He's a fine tournament option here. 6,900 on DraftKings, 7K on FanDuel. Again, I'm leaning towards Tobias Harris for the most part in this spot. And then Montrezl Harrell, I mentioned he's been shooting really well recently. 6,100 on DraftKings, 6,800 on FanDuel. I have interest in him. I do expect him to play upper 20s in minutes, and it is a pretty good spot here for him. A pretty strong cash option, but also some tournament upside here tonight. It is a back-to-back, so we do definitely need to monitor the status of Lou Williams, but he didn't play too many minutes last game, so I do expect him to be good to go in this spot, and it is a pretty strong matchup for him. Would expect him to get upper 20s, maybe into the 30-minute mark. He came out and said he was frustrated with the amount of minutes he played against Dallas. He wanted to play more, and Doc Rivers was somewhat obliged to the option or the chance that he could play more minutes against Denver. It didn't happen. That game was a blowout. But yeah, I have interest in Lou Williams, especially in tournaments. 5,200 on FanDuel. Very, very strong tournament, even cash game option here. 6,400 on DraftKings. More of a tournament play. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's fine and as a value option, not terribly appealing, but he's fine in tournaments. Patrick Beverley, Avery Bradley, two guys that could get some extended run here. Avery Bradley, the interesting one here, coming in at 3,700 on DraftKings, 4,200 on FanDuel as a dropped option score tonight. Looking at the Clippers or the Golden State side of things, Clippers ranked 22nd in defensive efficiency to point guards that are allowing them to shoot 37% from three. Curry has topped 30 points in 5 of his last 8 games. Great spot here for Curry. I do like him as a tournament and cash game option. Should be able to torch the Clippers here. A little bit of a shooting, I guess you can call it a slump recently, but he's perfectly fine in all formats. Kevin Durant, definitely intriguing here. Clippers have been shredded by small forwards. They're allowing 44.9% field goal percentage and 38.3% from beyond the arc. Kevin Durant, obviously a great option here, coming in at 9,400 on DraftKings. He is also somewhat affordable over on FanDuel at 9,700. So Curry and Durant, the two top options here. Both guys projected for over 50 fantasy points in the spot. Draymond Green, just way too cheap here to overlook. I was hoping he would struggle against the Mavericks. He still didn't have. He still had a pretty strong game. Does have double-digit rebounds in 3 straight. God, I was hoping he would struggle against the Mavericks, and that would lower his ownership. But it's $6,400 on DraftKings, $6,700 on FanDuel. I don't know how you don't love Draymond Green in the spot. Clippers giving up 46.2 rebounds, 51.7 points in the paint. A pretty big boost to Draymond Green here tonight. You can look at Looney as a decent value center. Again, Clippers really struggling against big men. Kevon Looney still playing solid minutes. 3,600 on DraftKings, 3,900 on FanDuel. Still getting most nights some decent run in the 20s. It's a pretty strong spot for Looney. And then Jonas Jerebko torched the Mavs last night, still playing in the low 20s, and it's not a terrible spot for Jonas Jerebko tonight. You can look at Clay as a tournament shooting guard. Eventually, he's going to break out of that shooting slump, kind of like we saw earlier in the season. Dallas at Portland. Portland 7-point favorites in this one, 215.5 over under. Dirk not expected to suit up here. Dennis Smith Jr. not expected to suit up here. And Luka Doncic questionable after taking a fall into the stands last night and hurting his hip. Luka is averaging 25.5 points per game over his last 4 games. Portland entered Saturday last in the NBA in three-point defense, allowing opponents to go off at 37.8% from beyond the arc. Damian Lillard has been shooting really, really well. 18 of 26 from 3 over his last 4 games, but his backcourt mate CJ McCollum just 10 for 31 from the floor over his last 2 games, including over 6 from 3-point range. Looking at the Portland side of things first, actually, no, I'll do Dallas here because this is kind of tough. With Dennis Smith Jr. obviously unlikely, not expected to suit up. It's going to be a boost to Luka Doncic. Averages 1.23 fantasy points per minute with a almost 28% usage rate without Dennis Smith Jr. on the floor. I do like him in cash and tournaments. Portland has struggled to defend in transition. 34% of his field goal attempts are above the break threes. Again, I mentioned Portland allowing like 39% on above the break threes. Luka is very strong transition player. Unfortunately, that hip injury could hold him out here, which would be a boost to Harrison Barnes. Harrison Barnes already a strong option regardless of Luka's status. Whenever you take Dennis Smith Jr. off the floor, Harrison Barnes 27.7% usage rate, just shy of a fantasy point per minute. Portland 29th in defensive efficiency to power forwards this season, so pretty strong spot for Harrison Barnes. I have a lot of interest in him tonight. 6K on DraftKings. He is 5,900 on FanDuel. Even better play on FanDuel. The biggest issue that I would have is if Luka doesn't play, this could be a spot where Dallas struggles to stay in this game. But Harrison Barnes coming off a pretty strong stretch as far as minutes and field goal attempts goes. So I do have some Harrison Barnes interest here tonight. 42% of Wesley Matthews' field goal attempts are above the break threes. I mentioned Portland getting torched on above the break threes. It is a revenge game for Wesley Matthews. Coming in at 4,300. Pretty strong spot here for him tonight. Like, that's just way too cheap here for Wesley Matthews. 5,100 on FanDuel. I could see a fade, especially with Lou Williams being right around that same price tag. But yeah, he has a 21% usage rate whenever you take Dennis Smith Jr. Off the floor. And let me pull up what his usage rate is whenever we don't have 20.7, 0.83 fantasy points per minute whenever you take Luka Doncic off the floor. Looking at the rest of these guys, DeAndre Jordan in a pretty strong spot here tonight. He's been playing really well recently. Let's see. Coming off 12 points and 23 rebounds. He averages 1.20 fantasy points per minute whenever you take Dennis Smith Jr. off the floor. But whenever you have Luka and Dennis Smith Jr. off the floor, DeAndre Jordan 22.1% usage rate, 1.34 fantasy points per minute. Portland, a team that has struggled to defend post-up bigs. We know DeAndre Jordan, a very strong post player. DeAndre Jordan, someone that I would have interest in the spot regardless of Luka's status, but a very, very strong play if Luka misses. We could also look at Dorian Finney-Smith, Dwight Powell, Maxi Kleber, some of these other options if Dennis Smith or if Luka Doncic misses. But I'll cover that stuff in Discord or in the breakdown whenever that news comes out. And then, of course, JJ Barea, a guy that we can look at as well. Portland side of things, I do love Damian Lillard in the spot. I mentioned he's been shooting the ball really, really well recently, especially from 3, shooting 61% from 3 over his last 5 games. Been playing pretty solid. Dallas, they do rank 3rd in defensive efficiency to point guards, but they're allowing them to shoot 36% from 3. The team as a whole is allowing 37.5% on above the break threes. Lillard just really, really strong option here in all formats. I don't really have a lot of interest in anyone else. CJ McCollum always viable in tournaments here. Dallas pretty tough on power forwards. Aminu revenge game, still a strong spot here still a strong value play at just 4,400. Has struggled in the last few games, but generally speaking, a pretty strong value. Nurkic can be used in tournaments. Last game of the night, Memphis at Lakers. Lakers 6-point favorites in this one, 207.5 over under. Joakim Noah is questionable. Omri Caspi is questionable. JaVale McGee is questionable. Chandler Parsons, Michael Beasley both out. Dylan Brooks questionable for this game. Grizzlies have dropped 5 of the last 7 games and 7 of the last 8 while failing to reach 100 points in any of those 8 games. Gasol has been in a slump, 7 of 25 from the floor over his last 2 games. I don't have a lot of interest in either side of this game, but most of the interest that I do have is going to come from the Memphis side. I'll get to them in just a second. The reason why I don't really care a whole lot about the Lakers side of this game, obviously Memphis, very strong defense, but these guys are all priced up for their performances whenever Rondo and Ingram were out. You have Kyle Kuzma at 6,900, who's really pricey. I'm still going to play a lot of minutes whenever with Ingram and Rondo being back. We did see him get 37 against New Orleans, but I can't pay $6,900 for Kyle Kuzma in a bad matchup. When Ingram is back in the lineup, so is Rondo. JaVale McGee could be back. That would also hurt Kyle Kuzma a little bit here. JaVale McGee, 4,800 on DraftKings, pretty appealing if he's able to play. He's 6,100 on FanDuel. That's an easy fade, but he's definitely interesting over on DraftKings and tournaments if he's able to suit up. I'm not going to chase the Ivica Zubac game. A lot of that came because Tyson Chandler was sick, did not play very well in the New Orleans game. Ivica Zubac got some extra run. If JaVale McGee was out, you could use some Zubac, especially maybe on FanDuel where you can drop a score, but again, I don't really feel like chasing it. LeBron is LeBron. He can obviously put up a monster game, continues to take a ton of shots, be a focal point in the offense, over 60 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. He's a strong option always, but if I'm paying up for anyone, it's going to be Davis in this spot tonight. Rondo is at least cheap enough at 4,800 that I do have a little bit of interest in him just because he can fill up the stat sheet in limited minutes. We saw him get 22 minutes last game. That does make him appealing in tournaments on DraftKings at 4,900. Outside of that, again, just not really interested in a lot from the Lakers side because they're just too pricey, and that team is pretty much healthy now. Lakers allowing 111 points per game. Conley continues to be a great cash and tournament option just because of the amount of minutes he's playing. The Lakers do rank 5th in defensive efficiency, 2-point guards. That does hurt his upside a little bit. Again, he's still playing a lot of minutes, and that is somewhat appealing in this spot. I do love Gasol as a tournament option. I mentioned he's been mired in a shooting slump. Continues to play a lot of minutes. Lakers rank 26th in defensive efficiency to centers. 27% of his possessions are post-up. Lakers allowing 1.08 points per possession on post-ups, so he is fine in tournaments here tonight. 7,500 on DraftKings, pretty darn appealing, and he is, let's see, what is he over on FanDuel? 8,500 on FanDuel. Jaren Jackson Jr. is pretty interesting here. 5,800 on DraftKings. That is somewhat appealing. He is 6,600 on FanDuel. As long as he can stay out of foul trouble, should play a decent amount of minutes. Has 30-plus fantasy point upside. So Jaren Jackson Jr., interesting in tournaments. JaMychal Green, interesting. He's technically, I guess, questionable, but I don't actually think he's going to miss this game. He would be someone to consider at 4K on DraftKings, 4,700 on FanDuel as a value option here tonight. Kyle Anderson, he's in a pretty good spot here. I do have a lot of interest in Kyle Anderson. Continues to be a strong cash game option night in, night out. So you can look at Kyle Anderson, 4,800 on DraftKings, 5,700 on FanDuel. Projects to be a pretty strong play here. And then Garrett Temple, very, very, very good value option tonight. That's going to do it for the slate, though. Some injury news to keep an eye on, and I will update everyone in Discord and on the projection sheet and all that good stuff whenever that news comes out. I will most likely have a Christmas Day podcast. If I do, it will be out late in the evening on Christmas Eve. So good luck in all your contests tonight. If you don't get to watch my Christmas Day podcast, or if I don't end up recording one, just want to wish all you guys a Merry Christmas.